ever seen the wonder in the glimmer of first sight? As the eyes begin to open and the blindness meets the light. If you have soul, say, I see the world in light. I see the world in wonder. I see the world in light, bursting in living color. I see the world your way, and I'm walking in the light. Have you ever seen the wonder in the air of second life? Have you come out of the waters with the old one left behind? If you have soul, say, I see the world in light. I see the world in wonder. I see the world in light, bursting in living color. I see the world your way, and I'm walking in the light. I see the world in grace. I see the world in gospel. I see the world your way, and I'm walking in the light.
Welcome, Journey Church. Thank you for being here at our online service this morning. I'm PJ. This is your first time joining us. We just wanted to say thank you, and we're glad to have you here. Before worship, we're going to have a little announcements. So if you have any prayer requests, you can contact us at journeyantioch.com. We would love to hear from you. We know right now finances are tight, so if you're struggling or need food or supplies, you can contact us through our Facebook or our email. And if you're still able to give, which would be great, we still have our online giving available through our website at journeyantioch.com. If you just go down on the right-hand corner, there's a little green button. We have an awesome message from Pete this morning, but first we're going to get into some worship.
Stay together in your name, calling down to you. Lord, like a fire, awaken the desire, burn our hearts with truth. You're the reason we're here. You're the reason we're singing. Open up the heavens, we wanna see you. Open up the floodgates, a mighty river flowing from your heart, filling every part of our praise. Your presence in this place, your glory on our face. Look into the sky, standing like a cloud, you're standing with us now. Lord, unveil our eyes. You're the reason we're here. You're the reason we're singing. Open up the heavens, we wanna see you. Open up the floodgates, a mighty river flowing from your heart, filling every part of our praise. Show us your glory. Show us your power. Show us your glory. Show us your glory. Show us your power. Show us your glory. valley of the shadow of death. Your glory that is casting out fear. Even when I'm caught in the middle of the storms of this life, I won't turn back, I know you are near. And I will fear no evil, for my God is with me. And if my God is with me, whom then shall I fear? Whom then shall I fear? Oh no, never let go. Through the calm and through the storm. Oh no, never let go. It's every high and every low. Oh no, never let go. Lord, you never let go of me. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, your perfect light is casting out fear. Even when I'm caught in the middle of the storms of this life, I won't turn back, I know you are near. 'Cause I will fear no evil, for my God is with me. As if my God is with me, whom then shall I fear? Whom then shall I fear? Oh no, never let go. Through the calm, through the storm. Oh no, never let go. It's every high, every low. Oh no, never let go. Lord, you never let go of me. Thank you, Lord. I can see a light that is coming from behind that old dawn. And there will be an end to this trouble, but until that day comes, still I will praise you. Still I will praise you. And I can see a light that is coming from behind that old dawn. And there will be an end to this trouble, but until that day comes, still I will praise you. Still I will praise you. No, no, never let go. Through the calm and through the storm. No, no, never let go. And every high and every low. Oh no, never let go. Lord, you never let go of me. We thank you, Lord. And oh no, never let go. Through the calm, through the storm. Oh no, never let go. It's every high, it's every low. Oh no, never let go. Lord, you never let go of me. Thank you, Lord. Used to be for creation, eternity in your hand. You spoke the earth into motion, my soul now stands. You stand before my failure. You carry the cross for my shame. My sin weighed upon your shoulders. My soul now stands. So what can I say? What can I do? But I put this heart, oh God, completely to you. So I want for salvation, Spirit of life in me. This light's uniquely your promise, my soul now stands. So what can I say? What can I do? But I put this heart, oh God, completely to you. Yes, Father, we offer ourselves this morning. So what can I say? And what can I do? But I put this heart, oh God, completely to you. I stand with arms high and heart abandoned, in awe of the one who gave it all. And I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrender all. I am yours. And I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned, in awe of the one who gave it all. And I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrender all. I am is yours. And I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned, in awe of the one who gave it all. And I'll stand, my soul, Lord, you surrender all. I with arms high and heart unbending, and in awe of the one who gave it all. And I'll send my soul, Lord, to you surrendered. All I am is yours, and all I am is yours. Thank you, Father. And all I am is yours, and all I am is yours. Father, Lord, we just thank you for the awesome God that you are, Father. Lord, we praise you this morning. Father, Lord, we just thank you for all that you're doing in our lives, Father, Lord. And we just pray, Lord, over this time of uncertainty, Father, Lord, that we turn to you, Father, Lord. Lord, I just pray that all of us would just focus in on you. And Father, Lord, I just pray over this church, Father, Lord, that you just encourage us, Father, Lord. You do not let us be distracted by this time in the world, but Father, Lord, that we turn to you in this time, Father. Lord, that we be a church that would be strengthened during this time, and we grow closer and closer to you and find more and more ways to reach your kingdom and spread your good word, Father. Lord, we love you. We praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Good morning. It's great to be here with everybody. I got to say, it's been really weird going through not having everybody here together on Sunday, but I'm glad that you can all be here so that we can get into the Word a little bit together. I know this is a time of uncertainty, but we serve a God that is consistent, and He is always on the throne, and He is always in control. So we don't have to live in fear and live in the uncertainty of what everything of the state of the world right now. So we're going to get started, so let's go ahead and open in prayer. Dear Lord, I thank you for this day, and I thank you for all these people that are watching from wherever they're watching. Lord, I pray that you would prepare each one of our hearts and our minds, that we are ready to receive what you have for us, Lord. And I pray that you would be with me, that I would speak the words that you would have me speak, Lord. I pray that I would get out of your way so that you could accomplish what you have to accomplish, Lord. In your name, amen. So, even when the world isn't going crazy with the pandemic that's keeping us all inside, it can often feel like we're living in a world where obstacles and problems and everything is just being built up against us, and we can feel a little overwhelmed by all of the problems that we see in our lives. And this could take place in our professional lives, where you can be facing problems with work or problems with your finances and you just don't see a way out. Or it could be in your personal lives, where you're having issues with family or friends or your spouse or your kids, and you're just experiencing broken relationships and you don't know how to go about mending them. And again, it's the problems that you're facing seem completely insurmountable. They seem like there's no way that you could possibly overcome the issues ahead of you. Or even in your spiritual lives, where you know that God is calling you to more, and God is calling you to elevate yourself in ministry, or you know that you're not taking your relationship with God as seriously as you should, but still you don't feel that you're prepared, you don't feel that you're smart enough or spiritual enough, or whatever the reason you might come up with. You feel like there's obstacles blocking you from being who God has called you to be. And it doesn't matter what form these take, but I think that we can all agree that there are issues and obstacles that we all face on a daily basis, and it feels overwhelming even in the best of times. So I wanted to talk a little bit about two people in the Bible who were facing down massive odds, and not really about how they handled it, but more about how God handled that situation through them and for them. Because we are always going to be flawed, and we are always going to be limited in how we can approach a situation, or how we can go after an obstacle, or how we can solve a problem. But God is not limited, and He can accomplish things that we can't even imagine, and He does that often in ways that we don't expect. And that's what I want to kind of talk about. I'm going to talk about Moses and Gideon. These are two characters who received a calling from God and didn't react in the best way. They both, in different ways, tried to run or hide, and that's why I really relate to these two people in the Bible, because they don't have that gung-ho reaction of they hear God and they say, yeah, absolutely, let's go, because that's not how I react when I hear things from God, and that might not be how you react. They have very human responses of, I don't think I'm ready. I don't think I can do this. God, are you sure you're calling the right person? And I can totally relate to that. So that's why I like both of these characters in the Bible so much, because they have those same beginnings that I can relate to. But we're going to start with Moses, and we're going to pick up his story around the time of the burning bush. I'm not going to go over every verse leading up to this. I'm going to kind of paraphrase the story. It's one that most of us know really well, but Moses was raised in Egypt, but then ran away while the Israelites, his people, were enslaved, and he ended up being a shepherd out in the wilderness for 40 years. And after that time, God appears to Moses in a burning bush and essentially calls him to lead his people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. And this is no small task, because Egypt was the greatest military power on earth at the time. So this would be equivalent to going to the President of the United States and telling him to do something that he really didn't want to do. It's probably not going to work out for you, and that's what God was calling Moses to do, is you're going to go to Pharaoh and you're going to tell him he's going to release his workforce and he's going to get nothing for it because God has commanded him to. So it's understandable that Moses is reluctant, but he's not just reluctant, he starts making excuses, and he makes excuses after excuses after excuses. And I think that's something that a lot of us can relate to, where we feel like God is calling us to go in a certain direction, or calling us to overcome some of these obstacles in our lives, and we look at that and say, well, God, I can't for this reason, or there's no way I can accomplish it because of whatever it was. But Moses is quite possibly the king of the excuses, because he comes up with everything in the world of like, well, what if they don't believe me? What if they don't think that you've actually called me? And then he finally we're going to pick up the story in Exodus 4:13 through 15, where Moses gives his final excuse, what he thinks is his biggest one. He's saying, God, you're calling me to call my people out of Egypt, to lead my people, and to go and speak against Pharaoh and convince him to let my people go. And so he brings out his best excuse. He gives, I just can't speak well. I stutter, I don't talk well. So in 4:13 he says, but he said, this is Moses, oh my Lord, please send somebody else. And before this he was making the excuse of, I don't speak well, I never have. And so God, knowing this, then in 14 we hear from God where he says, then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, Is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and will teach you both what to do. The part of this story that I want to focus on is how God has sent Aaron. Because God knows that Moses can accomplish what he has called him to do. If he didn't think that Moses could accomplish it, he wouldn't have called him. But the fact is that God anticipated the weaknesses of Moses and the excuses that Moses was going to make, and he had already prepared a support system for Moses in the form of Aaron. Because notice that it says that Aaron is coming to you. Aaron is on his way. It doesn't say Aaron is coming, or call your brother Aaron and have him come to you and have him help you. It was Aaron is coming to you. And now when he gets here, you two will work together and you will call my people out of Egypt. That's amazing to me, because that shows that God not only has made the plan, but he has also anticipated the needs of the people that he has called. He knew that Moses needed his brother Aaron, so he called Aaron. And he was at work somewhere that Moses couldn't see, or even that we reading the story couldn't see at the time. Because God was already moving in Aaron's heart and calling him to come out to meet his brother, even though he has no idea of what God's doing in Moses' life. We often think about, we get We get caught up oftentimes in the protagonist or the main character of the story, and we think that God is only at work in that person's life. But God is at work in so many different ways, and God was working in Aaron completely independently of Moses. But the thing is that Aaron is not going to do any good to Moses if Moses stays where he is. If Moses stayed as a shepherd, Aaron's help means nothing to him. Aaron was sent as a support for Moses to accomplish what God has called him to accomplish. So let's take that back to us. So maybe you're feeling like God is calling you to elevate yourself into ministry, but you feel that you're incapable or you're not prepared. Maybe God's calling you to start a Bible study in your house or something to that effect, but you think, I'm not smart enough, I don't have a big enough house, whatever the reason might be. If God is calling you to it, he is already preparing the support systems that you're going to need to accomplish it. And he is working in those areas right now in ways that we can't see. So maybe you're supposed to start that Bible study, but your house isn't big enough to host any people. Well, maybe God's already at work in somebody in the church who has the house, who wants to host something, but doesn't have the heart to lead. But that's just an example. The point is that the support, much like Aaron, that you feel that you need to overcome the obstacles that are in front of you in your life, God has most likely already mobilized and is on its way. So God is at work to support us in what he's called us to do and what we need to do to overcome the obstacles in our life, and it's happening now. But we can't stay where we are, and we can't refuse to face those obstacles and expect that support to be of any use to us. Just like Aaron would be no use to Moses if Moses didn't go to Egypt, those supports that God is mobilizing to help us in our life are no good to us unless we actually move forward and tackle these obstacles and try to overcome these things that are in front of us and blocking us from living the life that God has called us to live. So we know that God is at work building support for us in ways that we can't see. But now we look at the story of Gideon, and we find out that God is also at work in other areas of our life. As much as I love Moses as a character in the Bible because of his reaction to being called by God, I think I identify with Gideon a little bit more, because Gideon never quite outright refuses God, but he always has that insecurity and he wants to double check. There's definitely fear there or insecurity there, because when we pick up the story of Gideon, he was what was known as a judge of Israel. And in that time, Israel didn't have a king, but people would rise up to lead during times of oppression. And in this particular instance, the nation of Midian had risen up and was oppressing Israel. So then all the Israelites called out to God and said, please deliver us from this. So God calls Gideon. Now, when God calls Gideon, he's hiding in a wine press so that the wheat that he was preparing wouldn't be stolen by the Midianites, because they would just swoop in and take everything that the Israelites had made for themselves and take it away with them. And then when God calls him, he calls him a mighty warrior. And mighty warrior being called on somebody who is hiding so that the wheat that he has doesn't get stolen doesn't exactly match up in my mind, and didn't really match up in Gideon's mind either, because he didn't seem to think that God was calling the right person. He made excuses much like Moses, where he said, well, how am I supposed to lead Israel? They were all about family dynamics and where your family stacked up in the hierarchy of tribes and clans and everything. And he said, I'm the least of my family, and my family is the least in the clan, and my clan is the least in our tribe. So I'm nobody. Why are you calling me to lead my people to end the oppression of the Midianites? So and then Gideon says, okay, well, I trust you, God, but I need some proof. I need some reassurance. So then he lays out a fleece before God, and he says, okay, if what you're calling me to do is real, then overnight soak the fleece but leave the ground dry. And he does more of these tests of God, where he constantly says, if I'm heading in the right direction, if I am really to do what you're calling me to do, please make this happen. So it wasn't that Gideon ever outright refused God, but he was second guessing God every step of the way and saying, are you sure that I'm the one you want? And I really identify with that, because I remember when I first heard the call into ministry, my reaction was much like Gideon's reaction of, God, are you sure? I mean, you know who I am. You made me, and I don't see in me the abilities to accomplish what you're calling me to accomplish. I trust you because you're God, but I'm just not seeing it, so I'm going to need to ask your reassurance along the way to keep me going. And the biggest point where this comes is when Gideon actually goes to face the Midianite army. So Gideon manages to rally an army of the Israelites, and they number right a little over 30,000. So it's a sizable force, and they're still outnumbered by the Midianites. But then they make camp, and God starts to whittle down Gideon's army. And he says, okay, you have too many. If I were to deliver Midian into your hands, you might think that you actually did it because of the size of your force. So I want you to whittle down the force. So then God says, okay, let everybody go home who doesn't want to fight. So then around 20,000 of Gideon's men leave. So then he's left with 10,000, and God says, you still have too many. So then he says, all right. And then he does another separation, and he whittles it down to 300 men. So now he says, okay, you're going down and you're fighting thousands and thousands of people, and you have 300 men. Now you will know that I'm going to be the one to deliver you. Now, the Bible doesn't outright say this, but I can imagine from what we know of Gideon up until this point, that this has probably caused him to have another crisis of faith where he's thinking, God, are you really calling me to do this? This is a literal army in front of me, thousands and thousands of men, and I got 300 men with me. And sometimes that's how our problems can look when we're facing down the army of personal problems, financial problems, professional problems, spiritual problems. Whatever it is, it can look like an insurmountable force in front of us, and we can look at what's behind us and we don't see much. And I'm sure that's where Gideon's head was at. I've got 300 men behind me and there are thousands in front of me. This doesn't seem possible. But then, so we're going to pick up the story in where God's talking to Gideon in Judges 7, verses 9 through 15. This is the night before Gideon, or this is the night that Gideon actually attacks the enemy camp. It says, that same night the Lord said to him, arise, go down against the camp, for I have given it into your hand. But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Purah your servant, and you shall hear what they say, and afterward your hand shall be strengthened to go down against the camp. Then he went down with Purah his servant to the outposts of the armed men who were in the camp. And the Midianites and the Amalekites, and all the people of the east, lay along the valley like locusts in abundance, and their camels were without number, as the sand that is on the seashore in abundance. When Gideon came, behold, a man was telling a dream to his comrade. And he said, behold, I dreamed a dream, and behold, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian, and came to the tent and struck it so that it fell and turned it upside down, so that the tent lay flat. And his comrade answered, this is no other than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given into his hand Midian and all the camp. And then in verse 15, as soon as Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, he worshipped. And he returned to the camp of Israel and said, arise, for the Lord has given the host of Midian into your hand. That's an amazing verse because it's one of the great encouragements that we see God give to somebody. But one of the things that I love about reading the Bible is the story of Gideon has been one of my favorite stories since I was a little kid. But the Word of God is so rich and so deep that you could read something that you've read potentially hundreds of times and you can still get something out of it that you never realized before. And the thing that really stuck out to me was, it's not the fact that God delivered this army into Gideon's hand, because that's something that I've come to terms with. That, God is capable of doing anything. He ended up making the army of Midian turn on itself, and they essentially destroyed themselves, where Gideon's men barely had to do anything. That wasn't the part that really stuck out to me. The part that stuck out to me was that God anticipated the fear that Gideon would have and the uncertainty that Gideon would have, and he had already been at work in the hearts of the Midianites. And he was sowing fear and uncertainty into their hearts, even though they outnumbered the Israelite army even before Gideon's force was cut down to 300 men. It talks about how they were like locusts and their camels were like sand on the seashore. There were so many of them. So the Israelites were hopelessly outnumbered before they were even cut down to 300 men. Yet God sowed fear into their hearts. And he did that specifically so Gideon could hear and be encouraged in what he had to do. But again, if Gideon had stayed back and he'd stayed in the camp, then that army would have looked just as unbeatable and just as formidable as it had before he left. But once he got closer and once he took the steps that God had told him to take, and he started to approach that obstacle that was set in front of him, he saw the cracks and he saw the weaknesses that God had put into that obstacle, that God had sown into his enemies. And with that, Gideon had the courage and the conviction to actually go and confront the obstacle in front of him. Now, I don't think any of us are going to be in a position where we're going to be facing down a literal army, but we can take the principles that we learn from this, and we know that God is already at work in so many different ways in our life that we can't see. He's at work not only in us, but he's at work building support systems for us so that we can accomplish what he has for us to accomplish. But he's also at work breaking down those obstacles and all those barriers that we see in front of us. Because God has not called us to try and fail when it comes to accomplishing the plan that he has for us in our lives. So he's going to do that in ways that we're not going to expect when everything about us is saying that this can't be done. Everything about, if you were to look at it from a military standpoint, there's no way that 300 men could beat thousands upon thousands. But with God, anything is possible, because not only is he building up a support system for us, he's also weakening the obstacles in front of us. He's at work in so many ways that we can't see. But it's only when we take those steps forward, it's only when we attempt to tackle those obstacles that are in front of us that we begin to see the miraculous hand of God at work in so many different areas. Just like Aaron doesn't do anything for Moses, if Moses stays being a shepherd, Aaron is only of use to Moses when he actually goes to Egypt and does what God calls him to do. And just like the fear that had been sown into the Midianite camp doesn't do anything for Gideon until he actually moves forward and goes and takes the camp. All the work that God is doing to prepare the ground in front of us, to give us the opportunity to live out the mission that we claim. Because here at Journey Church, you might not be called into full-time ministry, but you're called into ministry. God has great plans for you, and he's already setting forth everything that you need to accomplish those things. Even if you can't see a way, even if you don't know how it's going to happen, God has already planned for it. God is breaking down the obstacles in front of us, and he is building up support around you. So take heart. Know that we exist to connect to God, to connect to his people, and to his purpose. And he is actively at work to help us accomplish that goal. It doesn't stand on us, just like God didn't rely on Moses to free his people from Egypt. He used Moses to do it, and he made sure that he had all the power he needed. Same thing with Gideon. It wasn't Gideon who freed Israel from the grasp of the Midianite army. It was God. But he used willing participants. So that's all we need to be, is willing participants who are going to say, God, I trust you to remove the obstacles in front of me, and I know that you are going to give me everything that I need to accomplish what you have called me to accomplish. So I know that life is a little strange right now, and you might not have opportunities to reach out and start stepping into those areas that God has called you to, but this lockdown isn't going to last forever. And when this is lifted and when we can get back into the world, it's time for us to stop holding back and stop being afraid and stop looking at the obstacles in front of us and saying there's no way we can accomplish these, and look at them and say, instead we need to look at what's in front of us and say, God is at work in my life, and he is at work in the world around me in ways that I can't even perceive yet. but I know that He is going before me, and that means that everything that He has called me to do is going to work out according to His plan. I love each and every one of you. Thank you so much for listening, and we're just going to close in prayer. Lord, I thank you for who you are, and I thank you that you are constantly building us up and constantly not only building us, but Lord, you are at work in the world around us, and you are preparing everything for us. And I pray that as we continue on, and for each and every one of us, everybody listening to this message, Lord, I pray that you would not only begin to plant dreams and plant plans and just not only giving vision to people, Lord, but also giving them encouragement and the boldness to know that you are going ahead of them and that you are the one who is going to see things through to fruition, Lord. All you need is for us to walk in the way that you have called us to walk, Lord. In your name, amen.
Thank you for tuning in this week. Don't forget, if you have any prayer requests, you can contact us at journeyantioch.com or our Facebook page, and we'll see you next Sunday at 9:30.